Hey guys, as you know, our world is going through an unprecedented time during the COVID-19 pandemic. To strike out this virus, we, as coaches, have partnered with Fred Hutch Research Institute, who is working on the front lines to stop the spread of COVID-19. Please consider donating to hashtag Coaches versus COVID, and here's a word from Hutch.
Your support for Fred Hutch is a strike against COVID-19 and a step toward a healthier world. Right now, Hutch scientists with expertise in infectious disease, immunology, public health, and data science are working urgently to speed up testing, track the spread of the virus in real time, and safely test new treatments and vaccines. Your contribution to Coaches versus COVID will help expand this urgent work. Donate now at fredhutch.org/coaches versus COVID.
Hello and welcome back to Ahead of the Curve. I am Jonathan Gellner, and thank you so much for joining us. Today, we've got on Josh Herzenberg, pitching coordinator and quality control coach for the Lotte Giants. Josh was a scout and coach for the Dodgers organization before heading overseas to coach in the KBO. And on the show, we talk about his scouting background, which has helped him to become a better coach. We discuss some of the first steps when he took his coordinator role. We talk about some differences between Major League Baseball organizations and the KBO, and much, much more. You're going to love this conversation. And here is Josh Herzenberg. Josh, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate the invite.
Of course. A mutual friend of ours, and Drew Saylor, who I think we both know and love really well, recommended you for the show. And to be honest with you, I've been really excited to get to know you a little bit better over the last couple of weeks, and it's been nothing but a pleasure. But I wanted to just introduce you a little bit and just welcome to the show.
Yeah, sure. I appreciate that. Drew's a great guy. Sings your praises. Obviously, very excited for your new opportunity with the Rangers, and it was my pleasure to come on and get to know you and come on board on the show.
For sure. But for our listeners who want to get to know you a little bit better in a short snapshot form, can you tell us a little bit about how you decided to get into coaching?
Sure. I played D3 baseball. Grew up in New York. Left-handed pitcher growing up, and then kind of transitioned my way into the scouting side of things. Was really fortunate to meet some kind people. Did an internship with the Nationals after I got out of grad school. Ended up doing a year of a scout development program with the Diamondbacks based in Tampa, and then did several years as an area scout covering North Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas, living in Dallas with the Dodgers. During that time, also sort of a double duty kind of role where I coached part of 2 seasons as well in Ogden, Utah for the Ogden Raptors, the Pioneer League, and in Rancho Cucamonga, California with the Quakes in the Cal League. And so for me, I really enjoyed the player development process. Really enjoyed the camaraderie in the clubhouse. The communication with the players, sort of helping them progress and support them in their careers. And I figured, what a better opportunity than to continue hopefully making that a career.
No, I love that, and a couple of things that I want to dig into is number one, you're coming from the future, so I would like to know the lottery numbers at the moment. You're currently in South Korea, and you guys are really you're playing right now, which is a really neat thing, and it gives us over in the States kind of a light at the end of the tunnel, which is really cool. But let's dig into the scouting a little bit, because I think for most of the listeners, they aren't scouts, but I also think that it is something that could help us become better coaches. So how do you think that becoming a better scout and being, entrenched in that aspect of player development, how has that helped you become a better coach?
So I think more than anything, scouting really helped me with time management and project management skills. The evaluation part of scouting is always fun, getting there and actually putting grades on players. But I think the thing that gets lost to a lot of people, and I certainly was unaware of this prior to getting in, was the volume of responsibility that you have as an area scout. I mentioned my area was North Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas for the Dodgers. And
That's a
I
big
was pretty
area.
much huge area. And I think I was pretty much responsible for any amateur baseball happenings in that area. I was responsible for knowing where the players were, who the players were, knowing their schedules, knowing their medical backgrounds, knowing their makeup. And that required a lot of interactions with a lot of college coaches, high school coaches, travel ball coaches, private coaches, agents in the area. And the resources available to you are vast. Working for a major league organization, but at the same time, it is a very individual responsibility, and you have to be a self-starter and really organized. So for me, more than anything, more than the evaluations, more than signing players, more than the draft room conversations, more than actually writing scouting reports, I think the time management and the project management skills that I learned doing that role has really helped me just have a narrow focus and have a better understanding of how to prioritize responsibilities, in all aspects of life.
No, I love that, and that's something that I've never gotten to experience. So I think it's really interesting to get to hear that side of it, because I think of scouting, I think of like Clint Eastwood in Trouble with the Curve, and it's so interesting to hear the details of your daily routines, and so something else that I think is really neat, and let's actually let me go back a little bit. Let's talk about how you decided to go to Korea, and then let's talk a little bit about that transition, what that's been like, daily routines and stuff like that. But how did you ultimately decide to go over there?
Yeah, I mean, basically, to make a long story really short, got in contact, got a mutual friend of mine, had a connection with someone that had just taken a job out here with the Lotte Giants. Uh, I spoke with that person, the GM, on the phone several times, and was really excited about the process that the organization was trying to implement out here, and was excited about my potential to contribute to it. In kind of the dual role that I have right now as pitching coordinator and as quality control coach. So for me, it was a combination of a variety of things from a professional perspective, and then from a personal perspective, just it was very exciting to think about like moving across the world. I mean, like I said, I was born and raised in New York, and scouting has taken me a lot of places in the States and in the Caribbean, but never really outside of that. And this is my first time in Asia. We had spring training in Australia. That was my first time in Australia. So just from a personal perspective, experiencing a different culture is really, really cool, really, really exciting. So combining those two things, I mean, for me, once the offer came across and we had, kind of our conversations about what it would look like was really a no brainer.
Well, that's fantastic. And so, what does your daily routine look like currently? Because yeah, I mean, you're experiencing or did experience the same type of things that we're going through. And for those listening at a later date, today is actually April 9th, and we are currently going through the COVID-19 crisis. And you guys are practicing and playing games, or maybe inter squads and different things like that. So, tell us a little bit about your daily routine, and really kind of what you guys have been going through, because again, for you guys, we see inter squads, and everything is in a different language that I'm not even, but it's on the TV, right? Because I'm like, man, it's live baseball, which is fantastic. But just
Yeah.
kind of tell us what your daily routine looks like, and how you guys are handling that situation.
Sure. So, I mean, specific to the virus, obviously, we're dealing with it as well. Everybody in the world is. As of right now, it is just inter squads without fans in the stands. The league has informed us tentatively that starting on April 21st, we're going to be able to scrimmage other KBO teams, and we're hoping to be able to start the season officially in the first week of May. That could literally change in a few hours. It's kind of a fluid process, depending on obviously like the amount of confirmed cases and sort of the geography of everything that goes on. We're kind of just monitoring the situation and trying to treat everything else as normal as possible day to day. We show up at the park, we get our work in, and sort of just go from there. Specific to baseball skills, uh, I've actually seen it as almost a bright spot. We're trying to be as optimistic as possible. We're treating this entire situation as almost like an extended spring training. We are fortunate enough to be able to be with the players every day, both at the major league and the minor league level. So as pitching coordinator, we've worked really hard, myself and the rest of our pitching coaches, on implementing really individualized like weighted ball programs, for example, that are velocity training or training specific mechanical movements that we might not have been able to do otherwise had we been playing games. So while, of course, we would rather be competing, this additional individual practice time with the players has almost sort of been a blessing in disguise in a sense, because we really are able to individualize things at a much more granular level than we would have been able to otherwise. So the virus has definitely thrown a wrench in our plans, and we're definitely not taking it lightly, of course. But once we strip that away and we recognize that we're really fortunate that everyone around us, knock on wood, is still healthy, we try our best to
Hmm.
just go about our day to day as normal, and continue to just try to help the players get better.
I really like that, and again, it's playing in empty stadiums. It's something that has been thrown around, particularly this last week. And when they talk about Major League Baseball maybe starting in May on spring training sites, and how does that really change the dynamic of things? I mean, it's something that I look at and I'm like, man, it's fan experience is so much fun, but so is
Yeah.
baseball. And so I really trying to figure that, find that fine line between the two. And we obviously want to keep our players safe more than anything. And I think our ownership and your ownership does as well. But what has that been like? And just kind of take us through that experience, if you don't mind. Just dig in a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's been weird. I mean, there's really no other really way to say it. I mean, we have a stadium with tens of thousands of people, and we have a lot of guys that are on our we call it first team, the major league team here in the KBO. With 15 plus years of experience at the level, and so it's odd to be able to like hear the crack of the bat echo through the crowd, or hear the chatter in the infield without any activity behind it. So it's an adjustment that we have to make. It's not ideal. It's not something that we love happening, but at the same time, it is entirely out of our control, and everybody's well aware that it is, obviously in the public's best interest to continue this moving forward. So, our responsibility as a coaching staff is really just to try to keep the players motivated and keep them competing. I mean, we try to remind them, hey, as a kid, you probably didn't play in front of a big crowd. I know I didn't, growing up in,
Right.
in
No
middle school
doubt.
and high school and everything. And so we play the game because we love to compete. We play the game, to win and to get better every day, regardless if there's 30,000 screaming fans or if there's, an analyst and your girlfriend in the stands. I don't think that really changes anything. So it's definitely different. It's definitely weird. It's definitely an adjustment that our guys have had to make, but they've taken it in stride. And I think everybody collectively has done a pretty good job staying competitive and staying motivated.
I really like that point. I'm assuming you said you played D3. I'm assuming that they had about the same crowds as I did as a JUCO bandit, to where it's like parents, grandparents. Sometimes you have a girlfriend show up if you're lucky enough to find a girl on campus. But
Yeah, and then lucky enough to convince her to come. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
there you go. And then they never come
Yeah.
again because they're like, seriously,
Yeah, they're
this is
like, I don't
it.
want to watch
But
this. Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. And then you've got the red shirt guys doing stuff in the press box with funny
Yeah,
noises and stuff. So
exactly.
you're like,
Yeah.
welcome to JUCO and D3 baseball. But
You and I had the
but
exact
let's
same experience. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I think it's a shared experience for most of the listeners who played at
Definitely.
one or the other. But let's talk about the first steps that you took, because I think that with any new job that we take, there's always like that transition period of like the I oh expletive, right? And you're like, oh
Hmm.
crap, what did I get myself into? What's the first thing that I'm going to do? Because you're looking at this task as a whole, as like a macro perspective, and then you start to settle down. You start to think about, okay, these are the first couple of steps that I think that will make the most impact. So you're coming from the Dodgers organization that has done a fantastic job of player development. You get on a plane, you fly overseas, you're in Australia, and you're just, before this, I'm sure you've got all of this planned out. But what were some different steps that you took first, as kind of just to lay the groundwork for the plan that you're starting to put in place now?
Yeah, great question. So, I was actually really fortunate. I was able to spend about 2.5 weeks out here in the fall, in November, towards the end of our fall camp or instructional league. Really just getting to know everyone, whether it was from like our minor league players to our major league coaches to our research and development department. I think the overwhelming nature of that was more in the language barrier than anything else, which is obviously something that we just kind of naturally overcome over time. But because I was able to come out here in a controlled environment where we were still several months away from competing, and kind of get a lay of the land, understand the groundwork of what's been laid already, and then where I might fit into that process personally, how I can support, how I can help everyone around me. I felt really fortunate to be able to do that. I would probably be like pretty overwhelmed and pretty anxious had I not come out here in the fall, and then just jumped on the plane from New York and headed straight to Australia for spring training without any guidance there.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
we spent the winter time, myself, the coaching staff, the R&D department, some of the players. We were constantly collaborating throughout the entire winter time and sort of building processes that we were going to want to implement together. So once we got off the plane in Australia and got over the jet lag, we could kind of just get to work. So, I mean, the transition, like I said, fortunately, because I was able to have that experience in the fall, probably was not as overwhelming or as filled with anxiety as it would have been otherwise.
No, I really like that, and to be honest, for our listeners, with a coordinator, and this is something that there may be more people that know about this than I did, but before really digging into pro ball specifics, coordinators really coach the coaches as well as sometimes they'll be on the field coaches as well, but its coordinators are like teaching the coaches what plan that they want implemented, and then the coaches are more interacting with the guys on an everyday basis. At least it is like that here in most coordinator roles in the States. In professional baseball here, is it a similar role there?
Kind of. Yeah, I would say, we're trying to implement everything on sort of a continuous, like circular communication loop, to where I might have a view of everything at like a 30,000 foot view, and understand, hopefully understand at least how certain processes kind of intertwine with one another. And yes, certainly, the pitching coaches that we have are working in a much more hands-on capacity in the trenches, if you will, with the pitchers. But I certainly, I try to avoid sort of the vertical communication as much as possible. We try to be a flat hierarchy. We try to have a collaborative process to where, if a pitching coach has an idea that might be better than mine or might be better than his peers, then we're going to challenge each other and come up with that idea and implement it successfully. So that circular communication loop that I outlined is really, really something that we're really trying to push forward really hard. I do, with that being said, I do have more of a 30,000 foot view, a big picture of what we're
Mm-hmm.
trying to execute long term. And so it's this collaborative effort where I think everyone has their responsibilities, and we try to create this sort of think tank environment.
Perfect. I really like that. I like the circular communication piece. I think that's a really neat way to put it. And so you said that I guess you guys are. You said you're inter squatting. Is this spring training for you guys? And then I really want to, because this was my first spring training in professional baseball. So I was like overwhelmed for it seemed like the entire first week. But I want to hear a contrast between spring training here in the States and then spring training there. But what is spring training looking like for you guys now? Has there been any changes with the virus? You said empty stadiums and inter squads was another one. Um,
Yeah.
but also contrast it with the spring trainings that you experienced here in the States.
Yeah, I mean, there are little differences. I mean, our spring training started on February 1st. The major league camp broke in Australia, in Adelaide, Australia, and then the minor league camp broke a few weeks later back here in Busan in South Korea. So I spent a few weeks, myself and a few other staff members spent a few weeks in Australia, and then broke off from the major league group early to help start ramp up the minor league camp. There aren't a ton of differences in terms of the day to day. We're still getting to the park. We're getting our swings in. We're getting our throws in. We're building up our pitcher stamina. We're doing some skill specific work with catchers and throwing mechanics, and we're doing very very specific work off a tee, or we're doing we're facing a curveball machine in the cage, and things that are really similar to how things work in the States. The process on the minor league end has been probably a little bit more similar in my mind to how I remember spring training happening in the States. And I think that might just be because there's more numbers, in camp, to where a major league camp is sort of just the group of players that were invited to the big league camp. But in terms of the day to day, I mean, we show up at the park, we get our work in. The guys get lifts in the morning. They do some individual, extra work afterwards, and then we go enjoy ourselves in the evening. Adelaide, we were staying right on the beach, in Adelaide, Australia, which was a beautiful time. And that was pretty much the standard up until probably late February, maybe early March, when everything started really cranking up in terms of severity with the virus here in Korea. the day to day at the park, our minor league facility is sort of in a rural area outside of the city. So, in a sense, we're almost fortunate to have that because there's less concern of the virus being communicated, amongst a large population outside of our complex.
Mm-hmm.
So we've really tried to maintain the day to day as normal once we're at the field, and just kind of be cautious and aware of everything off of it. We're constantly having our temperature taken when we walk into buildings. We're wearing masks everywhere we go. Monitoring our health and understanding. If somebody is constantly coughing or if somebody has a headache
Mm-hmm.
or these things, just kind of being hyper aware of our surroundings more than anything.
Yeah, I think it's something that, again, we're going to look back at this time man, it's something that I mentioned yesterday to my wife. I said, this is 9/11 for the generation that we're going through. And for us, for our generation, that was 9/11, that life-changing event that you'll look back
Yeah,
on and you'll remember exactly what you were going through. You can remember and feel that emotion. And
yeah,
it's definitely allergy season in Tulsa, and so it's I've had those thoughts too. I mean, it's like, man, it's I have a headache and I'm stopped up. I'm like, dang, and you start to play mind games. It's crazy, but I think for the listeners that are doing this, they're doing the right thing, staying home, staying safe, and we'll get back to playing baseball and again at some point. But also, did you guys have any like time off to where you had to take a break from throwing?
well, originally not built in, and then as we've extended out our spring training, that we didn't plan to extend out, we've sort of stringed out our throws to where we're not constantly ramping up off a mound with such high volume as we would have otherwise. The season was supposed to start. The major league season was supposed to start on March 28th, and the minor league season was supposed to
Okay.
start on March 24th. So once it was identified fairly early that that was not going to happen, we've sort
Hmm.
of just like, the word I would use is just strung out the preparation work. So instead of having a guy throw 75 pitches every fifth day or something like that, we're stringing it out to where he might throw several sets of 30 pitches, or he might do a live BP, he might finish up in the bullpen, or we're going to do some extra resistance training on a shadow mound, or we're going to do some additional weighted ball work with some of the driveline equipment we have, some things like that, just to try to mix it up and to try to not overwhelm the system, but also continue to have them improve at the same time.
Sure, and I'm not a pitching coach, but I think that, especially here now that, man, it's been almost a month since we have been all together in spring training. I think that that's something that a lot of people are looking to go, okay, what is exactly? I wish we had a map, like you guys
Yeah,
were lucky enough to say, hey, we're just going to push it back a couple of weeks and then get started, and it seems like every day you hear May or June or July or and it's like, man, I'm sure it's driving pitching coaches crazy, but as far as constant communication, I think that it seems like the guys that I have gotten to be around have been in constant communication, and they're
yeah,
throwing when they can, but again, player safety is at the forefront of that. So I was curious on that. But another thing that is new for you is really getting to know players personally, and I think that for the most part, we're a product of our environment when we're growing up. And whether that's culturally, whether that's in our own household, whether that's ethnically, I think we are a product of the different things that we have experienced in our past. And you can kind of see that, but you can't really experience culture unless you're living in it. And
yeah.
so, what is your process in getting to know your players personally there? And if you want to, just talk us through a little bit about the culture there, and then maybe how that drives your personal interaction with those guys. And it obviously hit on the language barrier because that's something that's real and something that's really it's tough.
Definitely, definitely. I think the best way I can sort of think about my process in terms of human interaction and personal relationships is thinking. My mom's an educator. My mom's worked in the schools for over 20 years. She's been in the White Plains City School District in New York, which is where I grew up. Um, and now that I'm older, I'm an adult. She kind of she shares more stories with me nowadays than probably she did when I was a kid. But her stories are very rarely about a lesson plan or about something specific, about a test grade or anything that the kids accomplished. It's all about the interactions that they have, the successes or the failures or the frustrations or the personal, issues that these kids are dealing with, at home possibly. And so over time, hearing my mom constantly share these stories with myself and my sister, understanding what was really relevant and important to those people that she was surrounded by and that impacted her, I think was really, really important in terms of a learning experience for me. Because, you can strip away the lesson plans and you can strip away the test grades and you can strip away everything that students are accomplishing at their desk. And what's more important is the human element to what they're doing. And that was really impacting my mom as an educator. So I've kind of taken that lesson that I learned from her naturally, just growing up in the same house as her, and I've tried to implement it as best as possible as a teacher here, because at the end of the day, as a coach, we're really just teachers. And that doesn't really have a language barrier or a cultural barrier. You want to develop relationships. You want to understand the person. You want to understand what makes that person tick, what excites that person, and what makes that person anxious. And so you can speak on their level. Every single person's different, regardless if you're dealing with someone from Seoul, South Korea, or the south side of Chicago or upstate New York or Miami or whatever it might be. And so translating that experience from my childhood and my early adulthood growing up with my mom and, coming here and experiencing this hasn't really been too difficult. Culturally, there are obviously differences between Korea and the States outside of the language barrier. Here, there is a hierarchy of respecting your elders and respecting authority. I think that's much more emphasized than in the States, which certainly I don't think is a bad thing, but it's just something that, as someone that grew up in New York, I think it's just something that I need to be more keenly aware of in my daily interactions around me, in order to respect what everybody's expectations are here. There's obviously a difference in your daily life, as I'm a big white guy walking around a place that's relatively homogenous. And so there's a different visibility in day-to-day life that exists here that didn't otherwise for me in the States. So that's obviously an adjustment that's had to be made. And then to speak to the language barrier, it is significant. I mean, there's obviously Korean and English share virtually no similarities. I've been very fortunate. The team has provided an interpreter full time for anything work related. And he's also been very helpful with like ordering food and going to the supermarket and things like that. So in that regard, it's been nice to have someone that can bridge that gap, obviously. However, that has challenged me personally to be much more concise with my communication. Obviously you're playing telephone in a sense where things don't directly translate from language to language, especially languages as different as English to Korean. So in a sense, it's been a welcome challenge, because when you and I are talking, we're both fluent in English. I can kind of just beat around the bush and sort of just put my message across, and you'll get the majority of the message just because you understand the language so well. Out here, that's not the case. And so it's really important for me to really be concise with my messaging, and at the same time, really, really listen and challenge the other person to be concise with their messaging also, so that we can get to exactly the point we want to accomplish as effectively and efficiently as possible.
No, great answer to a really hard question. And again, I was sharing with you earlier that my sister and brother-in-law lived in Seoul, South Korea for several years, and so that I got to hear different stories about that. Korean barbecue obviously was at the top of the list, but
It is great. It is great.
that's I'll have to experience that at some point. I really kicked myself for not going over there whenever they were living there, but I think that's a great answer, and it's something that changes with every year, because you think about here in pro ball, we have more of a Latin speaking cultural fit, and then over there you're like the outlier, which is another interesting dynamic that you're working through. But also, let's talk about the differences between the baseball side of it. And we hit on the culture, so our listeners got to hear a little bit of a background behind the why behind the behavior. But let's talk a little bit about the why behind the baseball, because I look at Japanese baseball, and I've seen a lot of different things that they do, and a lot of the different things that they do is because of the players that they have. And so that we obviously context is key there. But tell us a little bit about the KBO, the differences between it. I know bat flips are not frowned upon in the KBO. It seems like they are like met with rounding applause, and the higher that you can flip your bat, the better. But tell us a little bit about the different dynamic between baseball in the U.S. versus baseball in Korea. Some differences that you found, and then kind of how you are going about coaching there.
Sure. So, I mean, the bat flips are definitely, I think at this point it's so ingrained, I don't even know if the players really notice that their teammates are flipping the bat halfway across the world, to be honest with you. I still find it fascinating, but it's very funny to see just like a ground ball through the hole get bat flipped halfway to third base. No, a great question though outside of that. I think the one thing that I'll say that's really, really positive in my experience here is the amateur baseball is very different. The structure of amateur baseball in Korea is very different than it is in the States, to where um, the showcase environment that's become so popular in the States, that really started like when I was coming up in high school and then has just exploded in the last maybe 10 years or so. It doesn't really exist as much here. And so they play games, they're high schools, they play a lot of games, they play a lot of tournaments, and they practice very hard to refine their skills. So their proprioception, their body awareness is a lot stronger here than I think I've seen in some of my experiences working in the States, to where, if you make a suggestion on a mechanical tweak or on body positioning, they're usually able to do it fairly quickly, a lot quicker than I expected them to, especially for some of the younger players we're working with here. So that's been a really like welcomed kind of nice thing, just because we're able to sort of experiment and implement different things, and the players are able to give us that sort of immediate feedback because they understand their bodies really well. With that being said, I think not that they're not athletic here. Obviously, everybody is athletic; they're professional athletes. But I think the skill acquisition aspect of things that has the states, people in the States have done such a good job of, I think is something that we can ramp up here, to where we can encourage them to be comfortable being uncomfortable in practice, and something that we're really striving to implement in a competitive environment, to where they are challenged and they are feeling uncomfortable because it's a movement that they're not used to, or it's a movement that they haven't typically been coached through in the past. And we encourage them in an optimistic, obviously, in a competitive way, to try to work through the stages of learning that movement, to the point where it becomes a more of a natural sort of ingrained process they don't really have to think through. So in those regards, I definitely think those are two stark-ish differences that I've seen. And then just implementation of data and technology, I think, is something that we're like full go on here, and something that they haven't had as much exposure to. I was really fortunate, like you mentioned, to come from the Dodgers, where, we were at the forefront of a lot of the technological advances in the game. And so the players that I was coaching or being around with the Dodgers had a really, really ingrained understanding of those technologies and the data that was being provided. And so we're really trying to ramp that up here, to make the players more comfortable, to help them understand what they do and when they do it and how they're being evaluated. So those things are, obviously it's kind of a long-winded answer, but those are really the things that I've noticed in my short time here.
No, I love the long-winded answer, because I think that was very thorough. And so, with that being said, I mean, it's you mentioned that you're I think with struggle, it's going to help us to learn the task better. But I also I'm curious about, you mentioned the hierarchy culture of
Mhm.
respecting your elders, and for most of the players, I'm assuming that you're an elder, and you are, but I know you are an authority figure in their mind. How much does that play into them wanting to please you and not struggle, versus you want to put them in situations to struggle, and helping them to understand that that's okay, that's how we learn, that's how we get better?
So that's a fantastic question. I'll give you two different sort of answers, viewpoints to it. So I'm in a dual role here, where I'm the minor league pitching coordinator, and then I'm also serving as a quality control coach for the major league club. And so I might work with an 18-year-old on the mound in the morning, and then go to the major league stadium for an afternoon workout with like a 39-year-old reliever, who has kids that are in high school. So it's a very different dynamic of communication, both naturally because of the age difference, but also because of that hierarchy here. So I try to treat it similarly, in those two scenarios that I gave you. That 39-year-old reliever wants the same thing as the 18-year-old out of a coach. They want support, they want trust, and they want care. Now, that's going to look a lot different for people of different age groups, people of different experience, people of different mindsets, but their desire is the same. And so if I'm able to show them that they can trust me, that they can understand that I care about them, and also be transparent in the way we are evaluating their processes, and we're explaining to them exactly what we're looking at, why we're looking at these things, and why this is maybe more of a bigger picture conversation that we're having, or maybe this tweak is going to help us against this very specific subset of an opponent. That transparency over time builds that trust to where there is still a factor of, they want to respect the authority, they want to respect their elders, whether I am younger or older than them. But I do think that the comfort level in the information is raised. And so the respect doesn't come out of fear, it comes out of sort of this natural communication. And my hope is that they're not fearful of us in any way. I don't want them to try to impress us. I want them to have control over their careers and want to be the best that they can be for themselves as players. And it's our only job to support them in that. And so my hope over time is that we can continue to communicate those things to those players, and build that trust to where they can still respect that culture of the hierarchy, but at the same time understand that they can take control over their careers, and we still respect if they have philosophical differences, or if they have questions that might be opposed to something I might be suggesting. So
I love it, and again, that's another cultural dynamic that you have to work through. And I don't think that I think that the authority figure being so stressed over there, and it's a little bit different here, but just because I think that at the end of the day, players really want to please their coach. I mean, they
yeah,
really do, and so that whenever we're putting them in an environment where they are going to struggle, but with the end in mind and getting them to understand that at the forefront of the training, I think that that's really, really, really important.
definitely.
And so it's not like turning a machine from 30 feet from 30 feet at like 90 miles an hour and just saying, hey, figure it out, and then letting them go at it. And I'm sure it's the same thing for you from a pitching perspective. But how do you, again, with the language barrier, and you're looking at it from a holistic view, and you're brand new to this, what's your plan to get them to buy into what you're doing, which I'm just going to assume that it's different. Tell me if it's not. But what is your plan of getting the player buy-in? Because at the end of the day, we want the players to be their own best coaches, right? And
Yeah.
they're the only ones in their entire career who have seen every pitch that they've thrown, seen every ball that they've hit. And so if we don't get them to be their own best coach, then we're missing out on a huge piece of player development. But what's your what and maybe you've already done this in the front end of things, but if we don't have buy-in, we are not going to get the best out of them. What was
Mhm.
your plan, or what is your plan continuing forward to try and make sure that they do that?
I I think it's really simple. I think we just need to practice what we preach. If we're asking them to trust us, we're
That's
asking
awesome.
them to give us 100% buy-in, then we need to be able to do the same for them. If they have questions, if they have concerns, if they have disagreements with us, then that's something that we need to embrace. It's not a personal disagreement. They're not telling me they're not saying, Josh, you are not good at this. They're saying, hey, in the context of my career, my actions, my feelings, I'm not comfortable with this. And for a player to give us that kind of feedback is absolutely fantastic. I get excited every single time that happens. So we just need to practice what we preach. We need to be able to show them exactly what we mean. We can say everything we want. We have all these fancy gadgets we use, and we have all the technology that we have access to, and it's all great. We all use it every day. But at the end of the day, if they're going to trust us, we need to show them that we 100% buy into everything that we're asking them to buy into.
That's a great answer. I really like that. Practice what you preach, and I think that that's that's obviously how you build trust. That's how you show them exactly what we're trying to do. And again, in a setting where you are the authority figure, and they almost take every word that you say for granted. I think that's really cool, and they not only can hear you say that which sometimes there's some things could be lost in translation, who knows? But if they're
Totally.
seeing you put in that work every single day, I think that's great. Let's say that you have a pitcher who needs to make this change, like you're either looking at data or you're looking at his biomechanics profile, whatever it may be. And so you're wanting to get him to make a change. Again, you're fairly new in this role, um, and and there is a language barrier there for a lot of the players. So what does that conversation look like? Because it's something that I didn't really think about whenever I'm talking with amateur players who mostly speak English for their first language, and it's something that we work through together. But it's something that I've been really thinking of lately because for me, we've got a high Latin population. They don't know me all that well, and they may have two or three different hitting coaches or just coaches in general throughout the season. And making changes for them is a big deal, right? And so it's the same thing with you, and they're still getting to know you. But I'm curious okay, so this is player X, and he needs to make this change, which is kind of a broad question. It depends on what change it is, I'm sure. But bear with me. What does that conversation look like, and give us some advice on that?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. I think there's multiple layers to that. I mean, I guess the first layer is identifying that change, why it needs to be made. We try to have a very, very detailed documentation process throughout the entire coaching staff. And so if there is a change that we identify, whether it's one coach or several coaches, or maybe the player identifies a change that he might want to make, we collectively sort of attack the idea. And like I said before, we try to treat it as like a think tank, right? So there's no one that's better or worse than anybody else at making decisions. It's all just a collective ability to try to embrace what's best for the player. Once we do figure out the documentation is valid, there's legitimacy behind the thought process, then we go to the data. I see data as a way to it's a tool in the tool belt, right? It's more information. It provides you with a structure around your process, and it also provides you with more tools to communicate with. If a player embraces a certain type of data, then great, we're going to attack with that. If he doesn't really understand that type of data, that doesn't make him worse than the other guy that does. We're just going to go a different way. So I look at the technology and I look at the data as a way for us to be way more well informed than using just our subjective opinions. And if we are detailed in our documentation, we are detailed in our process of understanding the data and applying the data, then we can go to the player with a lot of different ways to communicate the ideas, and hopefully the collaborative effort, that sort of circular communication that I mentioned before, is strong, and we're able to kind of have that barrier lifted to where the player is willing to give us constructive feedback, and we're able to give the player constructive feedback at the same time. And throughout that entire process, possibly the most important thing, in my opinion, is the coach's willingness and ability to recognize that they don't know the answer. I don't know is a very powerful phrase for a coach. And I think that helps build trust also, because if I don't know an answer to a question, I just had a player ask me a question yesterday about tweaking his pregame weighted ball routine, for his throwing warmups, and I wasn't 100% sure if what he was suggesting that he was going to do was like great or terrible. And so I said, hey, I don't know. Let me do some research on this, and I'll get back to you. And I was actually really proud of myself just for being able to take a step back and understand that saying I don't know could be a very, very powerful tool. And through that communication process, that's something that we strive to really attain. And really magnify for our players that, hey, we're learning through this together. We don't have all the answers, and that's okay. We want you to have all the answers about your body. Like you said, a player is their best coach. And so we want to help support the player and helping him identify what's best for him, using the tools that we have at our disposal and the communication that we've documented amongst ourselves to make it a collaborative effort.
Oh, fantastic. And while we're talking about data, let's, dig into it a little bit, because again, it can, I think you put it well whenever you said, using the data as a tool in the toolbox, and it's something that can be overwhelming. It's something that can, that it seems like you're either on one side of the fence, you're either data driven to where you're teaching to what the data says that you want it to say, or you're on the opposite side to where you're like, I just need to stop watching a radar gun. But I think with everything, it's a balance of finding what fits either for the organization, for yourself, or for the player. And so just for those listening who are kind of working through what we've all been through of like, oh my gosh, I'm tired of looking at Excel spreadsheets. I'm tired of trying to decide what is something that's really important and what's something to look at. Can you give the pitching coaches listening a little idea of just some different things that you found of been like, hey, these are some commonalities that some really good players have done. I don't think that there's many, if any, absolutes, but who knows? And but just help those guys out, because I get it. The struggle is real. I've been through like the data brain freeze of where you're like, I'm really tired of this right now, but
Yep.
it's also
Yep.
helpful. So just kind of help us out with that a little bit.
Yeah, no, a great question. So I actually try to take a viewpoint of, we're really fortunate here. I'll take a step back. We're really fortunate here to have the resources available to us. We have a biomechanics lab to do testing with force plates and 3D motion capture cameras. We have tons of Rapsodo units and Endertronic cameras and, full several plyo walls, for our driveline drills and whatnot. So I don't view all those tools any differently than I would view, like you said, a radar gun and a stopwatch for a scout. I think when I was scouting, for example, I'd find myself in, Bixby, Oklahoma, your neck of the woods. And sure, I'd be identifying, a fastball. And I could probably tell you if a fastball was hard or not, but I couldn't tell you exactly how hard it was. And I look down at the radar gun and I'd tell you, oh, that's 92, or oh, that's 96, or that's 88. If I have a stopwatch in my hand, that guy can run. But how fast? Is it a 4.1 down the line? Is it a 4.3 down the line? There's obviously a big difference in that. So those tools help us quantify things that we probably already have a good idea about even better. And in my mind, the biomechanics lab, the Rapsodo, the TrackMan, all these technologies that we use is really no different than any of those things. We're not really doing anything different than baseball has ever done. We're just quantifying it differently, and we're informing ourselves in a different manner. And so that's kind of the way I look at it. There obviously is a ton of technology out there. There's a ton of data out there. It is very difficult to sift through. I find myself in like the sort of the black hole of Twitter at night, reading through these threads, or on YouTube, watching these videos and trying to learn. And I'm not really entirely sure, how beneficial it might be or if it's great. Stripped down to answer the question about like some commonalities of players. Missing bats is what we're trying to do as pitchers. If a guy's missing bats consistently, that's obviously a good thing. And if you see somebody at the next level who's missing bats in a similar way that person is doing it, then that's probably a good thing also. I know it's kind of simplistic to say, but that's sort of stripping it down at the very, very surface level of things. If a guy throws a four-seam fastball that has, sort of that ride to it that you can kind of see where it's got that giddy up, that life through the zone, and then he has a big downer curveball, chances are that's tunneling pretty well. We can quantify that as spin efficiency using a Rapsodo unit, but you don't need a Rapsodo to tell you that that's a pretty good pitch, and you can work off of that. We've been working off of that for over 100 years as coaches without a Rapsodo, and I think baseball coaches have done a pretty good job to this point. So I look at the data and all the technology that we have as fantastic tools to use, but at the same time, I definitely don't think it's reinventing the wheel by any means. I just think it's tightening the wheel and making everything move more efficiently.
I love that, and the more that I do these conversations, and the more that I talk to good coaches like yourself, it seems that simple. You said it sounds simple, but simple wins. Like simple does win, and we look
Yep.
at a lot of coaches or a lot of players who look back on their careers and they're like, man, this coach really helped simplify things for me. That is enough evidence, as we know, and the Einstein quote, it's making things simple, not simpler, right?
Yeah.
And so just trying to figure out, okay, let me look at this holistically. What are the keystone movements that we need, and how do we teach those really, really well, rather than trying to Q salad them and throw just a thousand different things at them at one time, and they're just going, oh my gosh, what's going on? That's our job. That's our job to get to have our mind like that, and then be able to filter it out to the players.
Well, I
But
think it's our
another
job to
thing,
figure out exactly what the player's feeling also, because what they're feeling isn't necessarily what they're doing,
great
and that's
point.
okay. We need to figure out. I'll give you an example. There was a player that I coached for 2 years with the Dodgers, he's an outfielder, and he swore he swung down. He just swore he swung down on the ball, and he didn't. We knew he didn't. We had the blast motion and the diamond kinetics and the KVS, and we had his launch angles and we had his exit velocities, and he hit a ton of home runs in the minor leagues. He was a very strong player, but he was convinced he swung down. And so when he cued himself to swing down and got his A swing off, we said, great, okay, keep swinging down. Hey, if that's the cue that works for you, then keep doing it. There's nothing. We know you're not swinging down in actuality, but if that's the cue that works for you, that enables you to do what's best in the game, and we're able to identify this is the cue and this is the result. That's great. We don't really care what the cue is at all, as long as it works for the player, and I think that's important to identify also.
No, it's a great point. Great point. And so, again, for our listeners, most of them are in the college or amateur level. What are some different Keystone movements that you're looking for from the delivery? So, I think we all have bias, and I think that we all are looking for different things because, again, we're coaches. We've been doing this for a long time, and there are some things that we feel a lot of people do well, and that's kind of what we go to, or for video, or just looking at just player X or player Y and trying to get them to move a little bit better. But are there any things that you look for first because you think that it could clean up other things? It could be mechanical, or it could just be how they move. You look to that first, or just kind of walk us through, if you're trying to make, if a new player comes in and you're trying to look over video and you want to make a change, what are some different things that you're looking for as far as that goes?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Don Alexander is one of the pitching coordinators for the Dodgers. Once said that he always starts from the ball and works back. The ball tells the story, and so I've tried to do that. As I've gotten further along in my coaching career, and I continue to learn. See how the ball works. See what the stuff looks like. See how the ball plays out of the hand. If it might look unconventional to you in terms of their mechanics, in terms of their movements, but it works for them, great. I think just looking at surface level, I think, guys like Corey Kluber or guys like Chris Sale that you watch on TV every fifth day, I probably wouldn't teach a kid to naturally move their arms and their bodies the way that those two guys do. And yet they're at the top of the game. So there's really no central tenet that I would define as, you have to teach this way. I don't think that's a really cookie cutter is, in my opinion, just not a really great way to help individualize athletic movements. There are certain cues, I think, for health factors. We want the arm at or inside of 90 at foot strike, weight bearing foot strike. So when your foot hits the ground, your front foot hits the ground, and the weight fully transfers, you want your arm at or inside of 90. I'm a pretty big proponent of figuring out how the back foot is utilizing the ground. The back foot is the only part of your body that's touching the ground from the very start of your delivery to release. And if you're engaged with the ground and you're using the ground and you're moving your forces, you're riding the slope of the mound efficiently, everything else will generally stack itself. With obviously some variables involved with that statement. So, I mean, those are kind of things that I would look at right away. I would say, number one, how does the ball work? If the guy's a good pitcher, the guy's a good pitcher. We're not going to try to. Sometimes the guy's just good. Sometimes we need to get him out there and just compete. And then once you peel that back and you can start to make some tweaks here and there, I think just importance for health and repeatability, I think is getting the arm into slot on time, and then how the back foot kind of engages with the ground. And these are things that I've learned probably more recently than I should have. When I was a scout, I was a pretty big stickler for I didn't love longer arm actions, and out of the glove, or I didn't love when guys recoiled their arms after release, and I've come to find out that those are kinetic principles that you work for a lot of guys. You see a lot of guys with a longer arm action that are very successful in the big leagues. You see a lot of big league starters, utilizing a recoil because they're decelerating their arm, because there's such a violent movement in internal rotation through the throw that they need to decelerate their arm by recoiling backwards. You see guys like Walker Buehler doing it, or Yordan Ventura obviously was a great example of that prior to his passing. So guys like that have been really successful at the major leagues with these mechanics. And a few years ago, if you asked me if that was good, if I would teach that, I would have told you no. And that was wrong. The reality is every pitcher is different. Every person is different. And we need to understand how the body moves before we really make any kind of firm decisions.
For sure, great answer. And again, it's interesting to hear every coach's thought process on just the why behind it. Because again, if I think we're all entrenched in what we are trying, the changes that we're trying to make, and we all have a why behind it. So I love getting to hear that aspect of it. But let's talk a little bit about yourself. And obviously, you're a guy who's well spoken, well educated, and has gotten to experience a lot of different cultures. Growing up in New York, obviously, is one, but getting to see different parts of the country and then moving to a different country. But what's something that you've learned lately that has really gotten you excited, either about your own learning, about psychology, about the game of baseball, about anything in general? But what's something that you've learned lately that's really piqued your interest?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, experiencing the Korean culture, I think just every day there's a new thing that I'm learning that's different, and some of it's great, some of it's just an adjustment that I need to make. So, nothing really specific there that I can really pinpoint, other than, like you said, every barbecue place is better than the last. I guess specific to baseball, I mean, I love learning. I'm constantly, like I said, I'm constantly online. I probably stay up way too late most nights, like just constantly reading through things. Um, Something that I've actually kind of starting to dive in on the last few weeks has been comparing tennis serves to pitching deliveries, and just understanding sort of angular velocities and how rotation works. And I think, tennis players utilize their front hit really well in serving the ball, as well as with backhands. I think backhands, there's a similarity to a baseball movement of throwing a baseball. So like Stan Wawrinka, who's a professional tennis player who has a really good backhand, according to the internet, from what I've learned. I've watched a lot of video of him in slow motion from different angles, just trying to understand exactly how his body works, to try to see if there's a way where we can, further emphasize things on the baseball diamond, on the mound, and things like that. So that's something that I've gotten into recently, just trying to, it's almost a skill acquisition point in my mind for a coach to try to think outside the box and try to figure out ways to continue communicating the same information in a lot of different ways. And maybe we can find a breaking point to where something, clicks for a player, a certain movement that was previously unknown comes. So for me, it's a constant learning process. And that's something that I've gotten really excited about, like pretty recently.
That's awesome. Another thing that I have learned is that baseball player, again, go with me with the context here. Uh, Baseball players are all the same. We're all competitive. We're all slightly immature at times. And so that doesn't change whether you're from a Latin country, whether you're from the South, the North, the East, the West, Korea, Japan, wherever you're from. We all love to compete. We all love to have fun. So what is something that you do in training that your players love?
Oh, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. We try to make everything competitive always. I think, and we haven't studied this, but I would be shocked if it was incorrect to say that there has not been a single drill that we've implemented with the Lotte Giants in the minor leagues or the major leagues that hasn't significantly increased in quality the second we've put a competitive element into it. And I mean, simple things like PFP days, when we're working on PFPs, which is a drag. I hated it when I was playing, fielding and throwing to first, covering first, fielding ground balls, fielding bunts. All these things are a drag. No pitcher likes doing PFPs. But the second we split them up and we say, hey, you're turning double plays and we're going to time you on your double play turns, and we're going to hit you hard grounders, and you're going to play shortstop, you're going to play second, and you're going to draft two teams, and you're going to compete and whatever it is. They don't even need a prize. They just start talking to each other and they start yelling and they start laughing, and immediately the quality of the work gets better, like instantly. So we try to make everything as competitive as possible. We really, really encourage the competitiveness. We'll get in there and kind of give some jabs at them. At the same time, to try to like make that energy go up. When we're doing some velocity training, when we're doing some like hyper specific mechanical work, we'll crank up the volume on their favorite song. We'll start dancing around and kind of making fools of ourselves to try to lighten the mood and get them going a little bit, just to try to get them feeling loose and relaxed and really like energetic in their processes. So anything we can do to raise the energy, raise the intent level, raise the competitiveness in practice, no matter what it is, we try to do. A lot of that I learned from Sean Larkin, who's the assistant field coordinator with the Dodgers. He's a skill acquisition specialist. And so Lark would spend a lot of time working with like Clayton McCullough, who's the field coordinator, and a few other guys, really just trying to find like creative ideas where we can continue to like evolve the guys while not like overloading them physically, but having them really understand their body movements without recognizing what they're doing. Something we're doing here now in Korea is we actually bought like six spike ball units. I don't know if you're familiar with the game Spike Ball. And it's sort of like a volleyball style game where it's super simple. You just like smack a ball into a circular net on the ground, and it's pretty similar rules to volleyball. And so you play teams of two, just 2-on-2, and we'll just say, hey, like spike ball tournament for the next half hour. And it has nothing, there's no baseball movement, there's no baseball activity, but these guys are sweating and panting and yelling at each other, and they're exercising, and they're learning motor function, and there's fast twitch elements to it. There's reaction, there's teamwork, there's obvious athletic movements and moving different directions, and obviously a very, very strenuous cardio exercise element to it also. And they have no idea that they're doing any of those things. They're just trying to compete and beat their friends. And so we try to do all these really cool, fun activities to try to really get them going and really keep them competitive and fun, knowing that that entire process is going to really make them better long term.
Oh, that's fantastic. And friend of the show as well, had Lark on, and I think that we could probably record an episode every week for the foreseeable future, and it would be filled with great content from him. One of my favorite guys in the game of baseball. But last question for you, and it's something that we're all, especially during this time, we're looking for good resources to spend our time trying to get better at. So are there any favorite books or resources that you either dug into lately or in the past that have really shaped your coaching career?
Yeah, I mean, books, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, I really enjoyed. He's a Nobel Prize winning behavioral economist. Just talking about the different systems of behavior and thought. I really enjoyed Ray Dalio's book, Principles, which is more of a sort of a drastic leadership style of radical transparency. He runs a hedge fund based out of Connecticut. So those are two books that I enjoy just as sort of a outside the box thinking element to learn from. I read Fangraphs every single day. I jump on there and read all the articles that they write. I spend a lot of time going through the stats and the resources that are available on there. That's probably my go-to online resource just to try to stay updated and try to stay current. But I honestly think part of what I like the most about the industry is just the ability to kind of pick up the phone and talk shop with someone, especially in times like these where we are kind of constrained, we're uncertain about the length of this entire process and how things are going to go for the future. I think there's a comfort level in sort of the camaraderie of empathy, and talking shop is really exciting and really cool. So I'll just hop on the phone, when my friends aren't sleeping, in the States and, hey man, how's it going? How's your family? Let's talk about the prospects you saw when you were scouting in South Carolina or Southern California or Oregon or whatever. And I'll talk about something that we're doing at the park also. So I think talking shop is great, and it's a really, really good way to learn. I've picked up a lot of the things that I know nowadays just from literally just having conversations with my friends in the game. And so would highly encourage people that are listening to just like communicate, just chat about baseball in the most casual way possible. I really, really strongly think that's like an awesome, awesome way to learn.
I love it. And for the listeners who may want to get to chat with you and get to know you a little bit better, what's the best way they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Josh Herzenberg. My DMs are open. Welcome to DM me. Shoot me a message over there. We, happy to chat always about baseball. So you can find me on there. And then I guess shameless plug for those who are looking for some live baseball. Our team YouTube channel is Giants TV. So if it's just type two words Giants, new word TV. On YouTube, we will be live broadcasting all of our scrimmages. Unfortunately, the broadcast is in Korean, but one of the color commentators on occasion is our team GM, which I think is pretty cool. They also bring in some players, some pitchers that aren't pitching that day to kind of do a few innings of color commentary as well. So trying to be more engaging with the fans. You can hop on the YouTube account and watch some baseball. I'll try to be as interactive as possible on social media if you guys are interested in following along, and anything we can do to help make the situation better. We understand we're fortunate here being able to play baseball live every day, and hopefully we can provide some entertainment for those that might not be able to do the same at this time.
I love it. Well, I'm just going to open up the mic for you and give you a little bit of time as we close. Is there anything else that you'd like to tell our listeners before you go?
No, not really. Like I said, I appreciate the time. This is one of my favorite podcasts. I've listened to probably every episode that you've done over the last few years, and really excited to hop on here and talk shop with you, and appreciate the invite. Hopefully we can, get this virus out of the way. Everybody stays healthy and we can get back to playing baseball really soon.
Thank you for listening to Ahead of the Curve. You can subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, which can include Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, or YouTube. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please share it on social media to help get the word out. Once again, thank you for joining us.